everybody. I'm Frederico Lapenda, your host. And today our panel will be about commercial versus artistic films. Our panelists are director Nate Thomas, director Nick Villelonga, and director Brett Leonard. Hello, guys. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, great to be here, everybody.
Good to be here.
And so I'm going to start with you, Brett. The first question will be, is there a difference to you between artistic and commercial filmmaking?
You know, as we were just talking about pre-show here, you know, this question about what's commercial filmmaking, what's artistic film, has been at the center of the debate about cinema as an art form since the very beginning. You know, there was many who came on the side of like, well, this is a spectacle. This is really a populist medium. It has nothing to do with art. Many people still actually say that about cinema to this day, which is kind of funny. And of course, then there's the other side that was, well, this is meant to be a very serious art form, very focused on, you know, artistic expression that brings together, you know, it's the medium of the 20th century that really, you know, conglomerated there, and it brought all the different art forms together in a synergy. And so for me, I think it's almost a misnomer, the question itself, because, you know, to make a good commercial film, you know, I've been primarily a commercial filmmaker. I've been involved with many different types of films and documentaries and genres and all that. But to make a film that works for an audience commercially and as a popular medium, it takes a tremendous amount of artistry to do that. And in many ways, you know, I kind of like give it to the idea that, you know, to make, people would say, well, you know, making a pop song, that's easy, but, you know, doing something like jazz, that's hard. Well, try to make a pop song that's 2 minutes and 30 seconds or 3 minutes long with a hook. You'll never find something harder to do than that, you know? And so the same applies to making commercial films. And the artistry that's involved in that is tremendous, you know? And yes, you may have to do things in more of a broad manner that, you know, express something to a more mass audience. But again, that's really, really a difficult thing to do. And, you know, let's use one of the great films of all time that there's a film, you know, that's been out, Mank, about this film, Citizen Kane. Citizen Kane was, you know, Orson Welles was a tremendous populist. And, you know, he started in the theater and in radio theater and created these, you know, popular, you know, amazing extravaganzas like the War of the Worlds broadcast. I mean, there's nothing not about a populist about that. And yet Citizen Kane is one of the most artistically sophisticated films that pushed the rhetoric, the language of cinema more than almost any other film at that time, and yet was designed as a mass audience film. So I think that's one of the reasons why it's always at the top of lists on one of the greatest films in American cinema history, because it combines the idea of commercial and artistic cinema. And I think that's really what, you know, I've always been trying to find that balance of how do I express as an artist, as a storyteller, and yet make something that's actually commercial. And so the blending of these two things we're talking about, I think, is really where the sweet spot is.
Got it. Nate, you next. Is there a difference to you between artistic and commercial filmmaking?
No, there isn't. You know, and art is in the eyes of the beholder. So there's so many people that will say that, you know, big transformers, you know, big, you know, sensationalistic commercialism, that's not art. Well, yeah, you know, as Brett said, that's art. All the artists that contributed to that. And very few art forms operate like that, you know, where the editor, you know, he's an artist, but yet he gets art from the director. He gets art from the production designers. So it is art. However, in Hollywood, you know, we have to face the fact, this is for American, for how the American system works, obviously, is that it has to be commercially viable. As an executive at Columbia Pictures said to me recently, I got to put butts in the seats.
Yeah.
Just as simple as that, I got to put butts in the seats. However, I think just like I always give this analogy, just like that the movie business in America is a drug, and that a drug, just like a prescription drug, has a main effect. And then there's that side effect. You know, Viagra was created for hypertension originally, and then they found out it was allowing erections. Or minoxidil, Rogaine, was created for cardiovascular disease, and they realized that it was growing hair. That's the side effect. So in Hollywood, this drug of movie, if it's commercially viable, the side effect a lot of times is artistic, Oscar winning, and critical acclaim, and you know, but it is an artistry, no matter how you look at it. But there has to be that, for America, there has to be commercial viability. They have to put butts in the seats. It's as simple as that.
Exactly right.
Cool. Nick, is there a difference to you between artistic and commercial filmmaking?
I agree with Nate. I don't think there is a difference. I mean, it's all art. It's just, you know, we have different types of art. And, you know, if you go back to, you know, before the printed word, there was paintings and sculptures, and then there was books, and then they could read, and that became art. And, you know, then it was silent films, and then talkies. And, you know, we have these giant, which have become now even more so, the big giant Transformer Marvel world of movies. And I'm like sort of amazed by that. I mean, most of my stuff, even you know, I never really had a big movie of any kind. I made little independent movies up until Green Book. And so I make people movies, you know, because you don't have budgets, so you make movies about people and human beings and that. But, you know, that even in a giant Transformer movie, you still have to have someone to love and root for, and a good guy and a bad guy. So Citizen Kane doesn't get any better. I could sit there in those type of movies forever. But then once in a while, I just want to go eat popcorn and see things exploding and see you know, big James Cameron movie too. So it's all art, because none of it is easy to make, and there's so many people involved in making films, and a director with a singular vision still needs all these other people to make his vision come through. And I'm sure the guys will tell you, you know, there's many times you have to have a vision as a director, and especially if you're the writer director. I mean, you're going all in, but many times, you know, it surprises me how along the way one of these other artists will suggest something or do something you did not think of, and it all comes together to form this piece, you know. And I think you have to be able to adapt. But I don't think I've never set out, I don't know about my colleagues here, whatever that movie is that you have in your head that you want to get made, I've never thought, well, is this artistic, or will this people come see it? I think the real artists, and, you know, I never really talked about myself that way as an artist. I was like a big Italian Goomba that, you know, you're going to hit you over the head with a bat. But I like to think of myself inside. There's an artist in there somewhere. You make a film that drives you, or if you make a statement, and the statement could just be fun. Maybe it's a comedy, or, you know, or it could be something with a real deep message. Whatever that is, I think you have to just put all your energy to making the film. Of course, we deal with the economics. You have to put people in the seats, but I think as filmmakers, that's the last thing we should be worried about, in a sense. We should just, how do I make the best film of this story I want to tell? And then those other things come into play. Is it a big movie? Is it something I could do for 2 million or 1 million, or do I need 25 million? Yeah. All of it is art. And the commercial side, yeah, because you want people to see your film. Mm-hmm. But I don't think I've ever set out to go, oh, I'm going to make a lot of money with this movie. I mean, even Green Book, all along the way, I was just told, no one's watching this movie.
Right, of course.
You have two guys in a car. Just make a play. The movie, 70% two guys talking in a car. It's a play. It's not a movie. So you have to believe in what you're doing, and what becomes art and what becomes commercial, you never really know, you know. Obviously, things change. The studios assign you to a movie if you're in that world, or they develop something to make a big piece. But as we know, you could have all the money in the world and the film is not that good. So I think it all starts with your heart and your drive and your vision for. It's the storytelling is what's important. What story do you want to tell? That's where you start.
Can I kick in for a minute, Frederico?
Sure.
And I had heard about the Green Book. My parents were born in the South, and I was often told, about places, that the Black folks had to stay, and places they couldn't go. But you mentioned storytelling, and I think what's real interesting, and you're right, stories have been with us from the beginning of time. Our grandparents told a story. Your grandfather put you on his lap, or your dad, and told you a story, and he never said in the lead role is Arnold Schwarzenegger. They never said that. It had protagonists, it had antagonists, and it had conflict, and it had a climax, or your grandfather wouldn't have told you the story. So you're correct. Just tell the story. People want stories. And Green Book, there was as with any film, there needs to be an audience, and there is. Audiences are craving for story, and you tell the story.
To tell a story, and the thing that's so amazing about this medium and being a director in this medium is it is truly the most collaborative medium imaginable. I mean, it is about the art of collaboration, which is in a sense the art of being human with each other, and the more you direct, the more you mature as a filmmaker, the more you realize that's actually the thing you're going for. It's creating this safe space for artists to do their best work. So it's a very unique art form in that way, because as much as there's the auteur theory and all kinds of things about the singular vision of the director, there is a drive that does come from the writer and the director that is different than everything else. But at the same time, this is really about discovery. It's about discovering with other people what the story is you're really telling. And that discovery for me at this point, I might go in with a tremendous, completely specific vision about how a certain sequence or scene is going to happen. But it's that discovery with other people, especially the performers that are on screen, that is actually the joy of this medium. And to me, that's the center of artistic process.
Good stuff. The way I forgot to tell you guys, there is a tool on the bottom of the screen, and when I finish my questions, we're going to open up for Q&A, and at that time you guys can type your questions. My second question to you again, Brett, what are some favorite films for you which exhibit the differences between these two categories of films, artistic and commercial?
Well, I grew up as a kid in Toledo, Ohio, who loved to go to popcorn movies. My first job was as an usher at the Showcase Cinemas in Toledo when the summer that Star Wars opened. And so I suddenly saw this.
Me too, by the way. I was an usher, and my first movie was Star Wars.
Right, so we have that same experience.
I'm from Ohio.
Oh, really? All right. So that experience of seeing this thing that just grabbed the popular imagination at a time when it was so fundamental for me as a young man. And then we used to do this. There's these big speakers behind the screen called the Voice of the Theater LTEX, they used to be called, and you could go and sit on top of those screens and look through the screen, because the screen was perforated. You could kind of see the ghostly images of everybody out there in the theater. And I learned something about filmmaking because I'm watching and I'm seeing the kinesthetic effect that the way George made those sequences, everyone in the theater would look a certain way at the same time, then go like this. And I would realize, oh my God, there is this art behind making an audience follow this visual language of cinema. And it was so palpable to me because that was a perfect film to experience that with at that time. And the artistry of the visual effects. And then I've been involved with visual effects my whole career. And there's so much artistry that goes in. Use Transformers as an example, just making a building corner explode in the right way with the fragmentation of, some artist is focusing on that for sometimes months of their life just to get that right so that no one in the audience notices that it's not real, So in a way, a lot of the artistry in cinema is invisible. And so for me, obviously I grew up with Steven Spielberg films, with George Lucas films, and yet in Toledo there was an art house, and I would start to go see Ingmar Bergman films and Fellini movies. And if in actuality, I believe there's so many similarities between those two different kinds of films, because Ingmar was dealing with, the psychology of being human on a level that was, never had before been plumbed the way he did it. And Fellini was creating this incredible virtual world on this, the sound stages of Cinecittà, and then taking his camera in there and discovering a story in this kind of crazy circus he created. And so for me, it was always about bringing the popular imagination into those worlds, and yet through a very singular artistic vision. So, Spielberg, Lucas, Fellini, Bergman, they're actually all doing the same thing, just with different tones, with different flavors. And the combination of those things is what formed me as a filmmaker.
Mhm.
Good stuff. Nick, what are some favorite films for you which exhibit the differences between these two categories of films?
Well, that's a tough question because there's so many fantastic films, and I think probably most of them are on all our lists. But I the first film I ever saw in the theater was Mary Poppins, and I made my mother take me.
Me too. That was remember they call it roadshow films?
Yes.
You had tickets in advance with the family. That was incredible.
I made my mother take me like 5 days in a row. So, I was fascinated by all those films, and then the things you got to see on TV when it was an event, like, to see a Sunday night movie on ABC, whether it was the Ten Commandments or The Wizard of Oz, and then, I just was fascinated by film. In those days, you had little Super 8 cameras, and my dad got me one, and I would shoot things and cut them with a scissor and Scotch tape them together, and who knows why, writing and literature and reading books and reading The Three Musketeers and visualizing this and then seeing a movie about it. It just was, it was all blended together. Then I became an usher at a theater, and again, my first movie was Star Wars. Getting to see films over and over and over again, which we were allowed to do as an usher, that was another learning experience. And I saw big films, commercial films, blockbuster films, and then films that people didn't know of and were not big, but those films I studied also. So I think it's a blend of everything. Obviously, the bottom line, like Nate said earlier, when you talk to the studio guys or even independent money guys, it's how am I going to make my money back? How am I going to get the money? It's always about the money. Mm-hmm. But I luckily had a great film teacher in high school. When kids took film class to fall asleep, I actually was watching. So, you see Battleship Potemkin to see about editing. I watched the Bicycle Thief. You watch Italian cinema, Russian cinema. All the guys Brett mentioned, it's this sort of mesh, and it all comes together, and you see all this brilliance and all this art on different levels, and you're watching things in different languages, and that also I think was important too, because one thing to me with Green Book, I always wanted to make a movie that touched people's hearts, but by watching all these different films from different countries and filmmakers, the language barrier didn't matter. It was ultimately about the human experience. And that's when you realize, oh, it's all the same. We all feel, an Italian film made me cry. A Russian film can make me cry. So that's when you realize everyone is the same, and we can touch people's emotions and sometimes have fun, comedy, laughing, but sometimes bring people to tears. Maybe sometimes teach people something that they didn't know. I was very surprised that a lot of African-American people said, I didn't know anything about the Green Book. And most people didn't. But I was lucky because my father was telling me this when I was 5 years old. He'd be coming home from his trips and telling us, you can't believe what these people go through. It's unbelievable. That's what outraged him and actually changed his life, changed him completely, like a switch went off in him. And I got criticized on that too. Oh, this guy, he didn't change. Oh yeah, racist is going to change. People change. Moments happen in time, and those are the stories. That's why I always wanted to tell that story. So to circle back, my feeling was you can reach anyone because we are all the same. We all the same. We all want to laugh. We all want to cry. We all want to be mesmerized when we're in outer space and a ship comes over our head that we had never seen that before in our lives. It's magic movie.
And it's global. It's really the global art form. Yeah. It goes past linguistics, and I think that that's really critical. You know, we're in a moment where we all have to become global humans. Everything is incredibly interconnected. And one of the great lies at the center of Hollywood has been that what we do isn't really important. That it's entertainment. It's fluff. I mean, even one of the I think it was Jack Warner or Harry Connick, I can't remember, who said, if you got a message, send it Western Union. Now that's true. You don't want to preach, but the idea that people's lives are not affected and changed by movies is completely not true. My life was completely changed by movies. When I saw 2001: A Space Odyssey, that was the moment I knew I was going to be a director, because it was, talk about a movie that combined art and popular cinema. I mean, it literally changed the nature of cinematic storytelling. And yet in this incredibly populist movie that became, a tremendous movement almost. So, the global nature of this cannot be overstated. It really is the art form that's brought together all of these things. And, now I'm working with virtual reality, which is, for me, an extension of cinema. Even though it's immersive, even though it has agency and interactivity, it really is just cinema evolving in the context of new technology, which has always been what has pushed cinema forward.
Well, you made a good point too about 2001. There's a film. As much as I love dialogue and people talking, what are they thinking, and comedies and witty dialogue, Preston Sturges stuff. There's a movie you're sitting there, no one's talking for giant chunks of time. French Connection. There's a sequence in the French Connection. No one speaks for almost 20 minutes.
I know.
You're still riveted. So movies, cinema, it's an art form it's so amazing. It can catch you visually, makes you think. But then there's when the dialogue, when people are connecting, that brings you together. There's so many elements to filmmaking and as an art form. And it's just, it changed my life too, like you said earlier. I think all of us, that's why we're here.
It's really interesting. My dad, because I knew a lot about the Green Book because my parents were born in Jim Crow South. And my dad hoboed on a train because they were hiring in the steel mills in Youngstown, Ohio in the 40s. And he didn't finish high school. But if you met my dad, you'd think he had a PhD. But he knew all about movies. He knew all the lines to Sunset Boulevard. So my initiation to this art form was, we saw Gunsmokes on TV. You saw, those kinds of shows on television. And my dad says, I'm going to take you to the best movie ever made. And we went to the Daniels Theater in downtown Warren, Ohio, which still is standing. And they were doing a re-release of Gone with the Wind.
Wow.
That's when I realized it's an art form. I mean, because seeing it on the small screen, there is a difference. There are people saying theaters are going to go away. I can see it. There's a different experience on the big screen. But seeing Gone with the Wind, seeing the fire, and that was my interest in one day being a part of this business. But my dad said, my son is the best movie ever made for him. And I have to admit, that's one of the most memorable movies to me.
Absolutely.
And again, when they're talking about the message, a movie that changed my life while I was in film school here in LA was The Killing Fields. I had a certain way I felt about the Vietnam War, the fall of Saigon, the boat people. There's a way I felt. I said, well, there's no room for these people in our country. There are Black people that can't find work, after the Vietnam War and stuff. I saw that movie, I cried, and I said, come to America. This is the place where you need to be. They didn't preach it at you. It was it won an Oscar for cinematography, I think, that year.
Yeah, it did, yeah.
but it did have a message. So those two films, years apart, really cemented into me that this is truly an art form.
Absolutely. The ending of that film, using Imagine by John Lennon, was one of the most amazing blends of theme and soundtrack, and just amazing. And that film has really affected me as well. Same way.
Good stuff. Brett, which filmmakers have inspired you in the artistic process with cinema?
Well, I mean, looking back, to the silent era, Carl Dreyer was, experimenting with visual language in films like The Passion of Joan of Arc in a way that he moved the camera because there was no sound to consider, right? So he was able to move the camera. And what happened when sound came in is it kind of bolted the camera down for, a number of years because they couldn't get the right, soundtrack recordings without just bolting the camera down. So it kind of stopped the visual expression of cinema for a while until that got figured out. But Carl Dreyer, Andrei Tarkovsky, from Russia, and Kurosawa, these kind of people. Of course, I've already mentioned Bergman and Fellini. Those were the people of world cinema that were really affecting me. But I loved big American movies that at that time, when, Jaws was just like, I mean, it changed everything. So, Steven Spielberg, I believe, is one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. Anyone that puts down his work, because he's such a commercial, they don't understand how deeply that man understands how to tell a story visually. And so I studied them as much as I studied these, great masters from the silent era and from other countries. And I think it's really important for, students that are trying to become filmmakers to take all of those tones, those flavors, and realize that they all have a place in yourself, in your soul, as a developing artist, to realize, because there's so much world cinema that many people in America don't even know exist. I encourage everyone to get onto the Criterion channel, which is just incredible resource for looking at what's out there in terms of Argentinian documentaries that will literally just rip your heart out. Just amazing human films, and yet at the same time still go to the cinema and watch these giant blockbusters. People put down the Marvel movies. These are epic mythological stories, and they all have something for us as human beings. And I think it's that blend that's really affected me as a filmmaker. I love all of those filmmakers. Of course, Martin Scorsese, you have to mention him, because he's someone who he was very affected by European cinema, and he's taken a European sensibility into becoming one of the most iconic American filmmakers in history. So it shows how these different trends and blends really can affect and evolve you as a filmmaker without having the blinders on from other cultures.
What about you, Nate? Which filmmakers have inspired you in the artistic process?
Some of the traditional ones, the Steven Spielbergs. I did my graduate work at USC, so they used to say, and I was just a little kid from the steel mill town in the Midwest coming out to USC, sitting next to, these celebrities, kids, and Walter Matthau's son, But they did say to me, when you go to USC, at other film schools, you study the classic filmmakers, but at USC, you meet them. So while at USC, they brought Orson Welles there. I couldn't believe it. I'm calling my dad back in Ohio from the payphone. I just saw Orson Welles. He's, "Oh, Nate, my boy, he can make some movies, And they brought John Huston, and they brought Frank Capra. They were still living.
Wow.
John Huston, I think, had an oxygen tank. And so one week we screened like The Treasure of Sierra Madre on the big screen in the Eileen Norris Cinema Theater at USC. And then the next week they brought in John Huston. So those classic filmmakers inspired me. But, the good old George Lucas, the good old Steven Spielberg, when you're a film student at that time, you wanted to be like them. You wanted to touch an audience. And here, E.T., here's this thing that had people crying.
Yeah.
This animatronics had
Yeah.
people crying because it was about story. So even Steven Spielberg, you can't just say the sensationalism, commercialism, the Transformers. No, no, that's an art form, and it has the ability to do what other art forms do: move, inspire. It has those characteristics. So I was inspired by those guys as well, and of course, Black filmmakers like Spike Lee, the kinds of work that he has done. Robert Townsend, who's a good friend of mine. Those guys inspired me as well because they kind of broke the traditions. That's a whole different other conversation, but they were kind of locked out of Hollywood, and they kind of said, well, I'll just make my own movie. But they did make their own movies, but they still had what we just talked about. It was artistic. Spike Lee made his first film maybe for $50,000, and Robert Townsend made his first film on a credit card, Hollywood Shuffle. Still art. It was still art.
Yes.
Spike is one of the giants of. I mean, literally, he's a short man, but he is literally a giant. And I have to mention Francis Ford Coppola. I mean, I got to know him.
I was wondering. I thought Nick was going to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I literally, I got to know him, and talk about a man who combined all the aspects of cinema, into one of the most amazing, commercial pieces of cinema ever made, The Godfather and The Godfather Part 2. And now he's coming out with a new version of The Godfather Part 3, which I can't wait for.
Wow.
I was watching an interview with him this week, and he was saying that he did not want to direct the first one.
He didn't.
And when they approached him to direct the second one, he suggested Scorsese. He didn't want to do it.
I know.
Incredible, no? What about you, Nick? Which filmmakers have inspired you in their artistic?
He's probably number one for me, although all the guys that Nate and Brett mentioned, obviously. And again, my thing was always, how do these guys get this emotion? And again, Spielberg, you're crying at the end of E.T., a puppet, is going like this. So it's about how do you, it's not manipulation, but in a sense, but how do you get your audience to that feeling of whatever it is that you want them to feel, and I always aspired to do something like that. But Francis Ford Coppola, I mean, the Orson Welles, Fellini, Vittorio De Sica, but I grew up in the era of, and I'm blanking on his name, great director who did Magnificent Seven, films like that. John Ford. I mean, all the classic guys. But when I was a kid, if you saw in the movie Green Book, my father worked at the Copacabana in New York. So in the Green Book, it's the early '60s, but he stayed there. So in 1970, they were planning The Godfather, and they were hanging out in the Copacabana, Francis and the casting people and casting director Lou DiGiamo and Fred Roos, and to meet real mobsters. Yeah. So my father was the liaison between that, people at tables and doing all that. Wow. And when they saw my father, they said, "We're doing this movie. You have to be in this movie." They thought he was perfect. So from that, Francis said, "You have kids. We're doing this gigantic wedding scene. We need Italian families." And I was about 11 at that time, I think, and my brother was 8 or 9. And we screen tested with Francis Ford Coppola, and me and my brother, like 2 of the little kids in the wedding scenes.
That's amazing.
So that literally was a film school to me. I was so fascinated by every aspect. I wanted to be near the camera every time. And a quick little story about the wedding scene was shot in about a week or so in Staten Island at this house. And one day, the second or third day in, I think it was the third day, one of the ADs grabbed me in the morning before we were shooting and said, "Come with me." And I was so scared. I said, "Oh, what did I do?" And they brought me to Francis Ford Coppola. And I had, that's the director I had learned, that's the guy in charge my first day. So I was fascinated by him and how he was telling everyone what to do. So by day 3, I knew he's the general, he's the main guy. So they're bringing me over to him. I was like, uh-oh. He said, "Hi, what's your name?" "I'm the director, Francis. My name is Francis. I'm the director." He goes, "You may not understand this, but every day you see the cameras, we're filming everything." I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, the next day we watch what we filmed the day before. We watch it. I see you more than I see anyone. No, if the camera's over there, I see you. If the camera's, because wherever they were shooting, I made sure I was cut in front of the camera because it was chaos. There was so many people." He said, "So today," he goes, "I'm going to make sure I keep an eye on you." And they literally got me a director's chair and put me right next to him.
Oh my God.
Entire day, the whole
What
day.
a blessing. Wow.
Incredible
So I
story.
can't say any more than that. Done. I was done. That was it.
You were made.
I knew what I was going to
Made
do.
man. He's actually made man by Francis Coppola.
So he was the one. But again, Lucas, Spielberg, the whole crew of them, even John Milius, that whole world of guys, and Scorsese, obviously. But Frank Capra, amazing influence too. But Francis for me is my guy because of that story that I just told you. So he'll always be the one for me.
And of course, Lena Wertmuller. I mean, they were great. There's fewer female directors, but it's the time now for that to change. And of course, Chloe winning Best Director for Nomadland, which is an absolutely incredible film. I don't think I've cried more in a film in my life than that film. It touched my heart so much. And I believe that we're now in an era where some of these great antecedents to female filmmakers like Lena Wertmuller, who made just incredible films, going back to Ida Lupino. And, many people don't know that some of the great screenwriting, the early age of Hollywood was actually all female writers. Sometimes they didn't get credit, but they were actually creating all of those unique classics of that golden age of Hollywood, much more so than the men in many ways. Mm-hmm. So it's now time for those veils to be ripped apart, and for us to really see the brilliance of the feminine in cinema, because it's always been there.
It's been there. I got a chance to know before she died, Faye Kanan, who wrote The Teacher's Pet, and she would do workshops and just come speak to the students up at where I teach at Cal State Northridge. And you're right, a lot of people didn't realize the importance and the prominence of women, especially in the screenwriting area in those days. And I think the time is right. And I think Hollywood is open. It's been time, but I think right now they're giving them a chance. Yeah, they're giving them a chance, and because it is other folks need to tell stories, and there's so many stories. Again, the Green Book, people didn't know that story, but it was an entertaining movie. But now they've learned something.
Yes,
they learned something. I had a very, I won't say his name, but he's a very powerful director, and he saw a short film that a student of mine did at Northridge called Braceros, and he was touched by this film. And he says, "I'm a smart man. I had no idea of the Braceros movement in this country, where the Mexicans were allowed to come, the workers were allowed to come legally and work the fields here, while our guys were over there fighting in the war. They had to cultivate. They were they saved our country. I mean, they should think about something like that now, for Christ's sake, a legal way to come over. But here's a big director who says, I learned something from this short 20-minute film. And that is a tearjerker film as well, because it was based on a real story. But you learn something from films. So the Green Book, that's great. People learn something, but it was a good film. And I knew the story. I know that particular story, but I knew of that because of my parents born in the South. But good, if the film is enlighten people, great. It can do that as well.
And in that case, the movie wasn't about the Green Book, which is an interesting story unto itself. We got a lot of hit on that too. Well, why is it called Green Book? Well, because it encompassed what the film was about, and the traveling and what they had to go through. So I thought it was important, and Peter Farrelly, director, and the writer Brian Curry, to include it in a way to show that this existed, this is what was happening, And I think it opened up, a lot of people researched it and said, what is that? What is it? You know, I wasn't making a documentary about the Green Book. I was making a story that happened to my father that included the Green Book. But I thought this is something that needs to be, I'd never seen or heard about it anywhere else. So I thought it was important to include that with the story of showing what Don Shirley did on these travels in the South, and he didn't have to do it. So all that combined to make the film. So you can teach, you can communicate information and entertain at the same time. You know, all of it can come together if it's done in the right way.
Exactly. Those performances are amazing in that film. I'm just
That goes without saying.
you don't need the special effect there in the car is those guys. I mean, they're as interesting to look at as any special effect beyond any special effect you'd ever make. I mean,
And that chicken they were eating.
Both of them. Yeah, that was a fun day. But true story, right out of both of their mouths to me. Them both each told me their side of that incident, and that was they had a lot of fun doing that. But Vigo was blowing up on the set every day. He gained 45 pounds, but the two of them together, I've said it before, Mahershala Ali, I think the first time a genius playing a genius is my quote about him. And Vigo just transformed himself into another human being. I mean, it was a big deal for me who was going to play my father. Years before this incarnation, I was going to do it as a really low budget film. And then James Gandolfini wanted to do it. He was going to do it with me directing. And then he passed away. So when this bigger version came up, when I decided to have Pete direct it, and I said I can get a bit bigger, better version done with Pete, he really got it. Because a lot of people were like, why did you choose him? Because Pete knows how to make people feel. He made people laugh for years. And even his crazy comedies, I always got touched a couple times in there. So anyway, long story, that story has been told how I got Pete, but I chose Pete. But it was, who's going to play my father? So there were a lot of names thrown around, a lot of different people. I felt it had to be an Italian because otherwise sometimes you get a bad Saturday Night Live impression of an Italian, New York Italian. Not good. But when Pete brought up Vigo, who's one of my favorite actors ever, but I'd never even thought of him. And then I said, let me think about this. And then I thought of, the most iconic Italian probably ever portrayed on film is The Godfather, right? Yeah. You can think of, what's the biggest? Marlon Brando. Yeah. It's The Godfather, not Italian. No. So I went, you know what? Vigo is like our generation Marlon Brando. I thought he had that depth. And so he was afraid to do it, Vigo, at first. He almost didn't want to do it. But then he said, I got to talk to Nick. And once I was in with him, then we all dove in and look at what he put on the screen. Man, yeah, great performance. It's amazing. Acting.
Excellent movie. Excellent.
Yeah. Thank you.
So, right now I have a film that's opening today in theaters nationwide and Cinemark theaters called Triumph. And it kind of is very apropos to our conversation here about commercial and artistic films, because it's a very, very, I would say, very broadly commercial film. It's an uplifting, inspirational sports story based on a real life of a young man who in the 1980s, who has cerebral palsy, wants to wrestle on the wrestling team. And it was written by Michael Coffey, who has cerebral palsy. So the writer has cerebral palsy, and performed in the role of Michael by R.J. Mitte, the great young actor from Breaking Bad and many other things. And he also has cerebral palsy. And so it's a movie of inclusion, and it's a very, uplifting story that comes from real life. And yet, there was a whole debate about, well, how gritty do we get with this? How documentary style? And I said, no, this, the writer, specifically Michael Coffey, he wanted to tell his sort of fantasy story of what he wanted to happen in high school. And think about how many screenwriters through history have gotten to make their high school fantasy come true, right? And in this context, it was a man who has cerebral palsy wanted his high school fantasy to come true, where he, kind of gets the girl, he kind of, and we did something that was a traditional, very, commercial Hollywood movie of this, and yet still was authentic to his experience. And that debate about, whether it's, an artistic movie or is it a commercial movie? Well, it's absolutely a mixture of both. And yet I love what Hollywood movies can do to uplift an audience. And especially right now, we're in a moment where, an uplifting film. So I just want to encourage anybody who wants to go see an uplifting movie in the theaters, go see Triumph. It's in Cinemark theaters right now. And, we just had a big charity screening with the United Cerebral Palsy Foundation here in Brownsville, Texas, which is where I'm at, which is RJ's hometown. And there wasn't a dry eye in the house. I mean, we had 4 or 5 different theaters going at the same time. They brought in a number of hundreds of disabled children to watch it. And they all were like, this movie has inspired me to know that I can do anything, that my disablement, my differently abled aspect can be part of my superpower. And, that may be a very commercial sentiment, but at the same time, there's a lot of art that goes into making that sentiment. And, I think we're trying to combine something there. So for me, the question here is a very personal one that relates right to the film I just have coming out in theaters today.
Good luck, buddy. It's going to be a hit.
Yes.
Thank you.
People got to go to the theaters. See, that's a movie that, like Green Book.
Yes.
Your film, when you have an audience sharing that experience at the same time, obviously that goes for a comedy in a big way, but even something like this, to have that emotion, it swells, you feel it. It's alive, So we got to get people back in the theaters to see these type of movies. I remember at the end of Green Book at screenings, people were hugging me. It was very emotional. I'm sure what you had last night.
Yes.
You see the response, how you can touch people.
And it's just it's better on the big screen. I mean, it just is. Cinema is
my
a big
point.
Medium. Yeah. And I hadn't seen one of my films on the big screen for a while. And it was literally, there was tears in my eyes because I was really like, this is why I do this. This is, and the impact of the film and everything was so palpable on the big screen in a way that we've all become used to streaming. And look, God bless streaming. It's creating an entire renaissance in our business. And I definitely don't want to, say anything negative about that. But at the same time, we still have to maintain that big screen experience of cinema, even if it's a small personal story like this. This movie was not going to have a theatrical release originally. We posted it, for a streaming. And yet because of COVID, because it was just as movies were opening up and the distributor and the exhibitors saw, this is exactly the kind of movie people want to see in a theater right now.
That's great.
That timing happened to work. And it really brought forth, like you said, a story like Green Book. These are still big screen movies, even though they're personal stories of human emotion, because that human emotion is just bigger and more palpable on the big screen. It's a fantastic experience.
I saw Selma at the Cinerama Dome, and that was one of those films because of the personal story.
Yes.
I didn't want to see it right then, just like the show on Amazon, Them. I said I wanted to wait for Them because of it's a tough message and for an African-American person to see. So I didn't want to go see Selma. And then I get an invitation. It's playing at the Cinerama Dome. And Oprah's going to be there to do a question and answer. But it was a different movie on the big screen there, as well as I saw Joker at the Cinerama Dome. It was a different movie. Then I saw Joker later on a small screen. It is not the same movie.
No, exactly.
Okay, so my next question is to you, Nick. If you were starting today, what would you do to become a director? So this question is because we have a lot of young filmmakers that are trying to break in the business. What advice you would do? What would you do knowing what you know today?
Well, I'd open a pizzeria and No. So I would say, I think something was just mentioned, streaming. There's so many more options, and for young people today also, I mean, you literally can make a movie with your iPhone. I think that's the difference. That, I've said this to I've spoken to some acting classes and stuff, and they say they don't have to get auditions. It's hard. I don't have an agent. I go, well, just make your own thing. You actors, right? Come up with an idea, get a phone and film it. It doesn't even matter if anyone sees it. Do it for yourself, because you're learning. Everything with filmmaking is learning. I mean, I'm an actor. I started as an actor, even though I loved film and wanted to be a filmmaker, but I've acted. I've gotten on sets when I was young and I wanted to learn, throwing out garbage. I'm pulling a cable. I'm helping. Any aspect of filmmaking that you can learn and do it. So if nothing is going on, grab your iPhone and a tripod and a friend, and who wants to be the director and who wants to write a scene, ad-lib a scene. That's part of acting, right? Get up there and improv. Pick a scenario. There's no excuse to not do something. Something will come out of it. I think, as a writer, I'm the type of writer, I like vomit it all out. I write, overwrite, and then sift through the garbage, and hopefully there's a gem in there and cut it down. So it doesn't matter if something's not good when you're done. It's still good because you did it. So for kids today, I'd say just go out there and do it. Make a little film, make a 1-minute film, make a 5-minute film. You have actor friends, you have a writer friend, you have a director friend, someone that can hold the light if you need to. Bring these people together. And if it's just you're in an acting class and everyone's sitting around staring at each other, just do something. Get up off your butt and do it yourself. And so I think that can and will lead to someone, a filmmaker out there, making a small movie. I remember an interview with Francis Ford Coppola originally when video was coming, and he said, you're going to have some little girl from the Midwest
from Ohio, he said.
Ohio, who's going to make a magnificent movie, because ultimately it's the camera, but it's the people talking. And if you catch an emotion, if you catch something on that camera, it's magic. So the big answer, or the quick answer, is go out there and just do it. Make a film. Just go out there and do something. There is no failure. It doesn't matter if it's good, bad, and different. Every time you do something, you're learning. And if you aspire to be a filmmaker, make films.
And you know what? There's no excuse these days, because you could make an unbelievable movie that can be broadcast to the world with this phone right here. Now, even if even cheaper phones, I mean, there's so many tools. Like you had mentioned making Super 8 movies, Nick. I did too. It was like working with spaghetti, cementing spaghetti together. It was crazy. Now you can make a film on your phone. You can edit it on your phone. You can actually create something that can change the world with the devices you have in your pocket. So right now, more than studying anybody specifically, or obviously watch as many films as you can, but go out and do it. Even Stanley Kubrick says the only way to learn how to make a film is to make a movie.
And have a story. If you have a story, they don't care what it was shot on.
Exactly.
Because most of the time they don't know. The audience didn't know that it was an Alexa or whether it was 35 millimeter. They don't know.
They care less.
Story.
They care less. Yeah.
By the way, that was part of our first Q&A question. And Sophie also asked, do you think the genre matters? Like, what should be the first genre of a film? That goes to you, Nate.
Whatever genre you like, you should play in the genre that you feel comfortable with. And that's because you're probably going to do that better. If you really like horror films, and you probably do the horror film better than the comedy. So whatever's your passion, I would choose that as a genre.
Yeah, I mean, there is an economic consideration. Obviously, the way you get to make films and continue to make films is that you make films that actually make their money back, or at least make a little bit of money. And sometimes you get really lucky and it makes a lot of money, right? So we've all experienced that. And many directors begin with horror films, and the reason is because there's a genre that you don't necessarily have to have name actors in. The concept itself is something that can grab the audience. And also there's things that you can do in a horror film that show your style as a filmmaker, sort of writ large. My first film was a zombie movie called The Dead Pit, and the reason was the guy came up to me. I was doing second unit on this other film as a second unit cameraman. He says, "Look, you got a zombie movie, kid? Because, I saw that it's the most successful genre to low budget of any other. You got one?" I said, "I just happen to have one right here, and I made it up right there in the spot." and then I suddenly got my first film made. So it really, like Nate said, it's about what you have a passion for. And at the same time, you have to, blend that passion with the realities of the economics of filmmaking, because you need an audience to go see your stuff in order to continue to do it. That's just the absolute truth,
Good stuff. And let me see here another question. Ryan said, do you think you prefer creating more artistic or commercial films? To you, Nate.
Wow, that's, the films I've done have been independent films that have, one of my films did a limited release to the art houses, obviously, the Limleys, the Landmark theaters. So I've never had a big commercial blockbuster kind of film. But I like telling stories, like Nick, and my films were stories that I just wanted to tell, and they found an audience. But they are artistic. And in all honesty, they are commercially viable, not like Transformers, but they went to home video. There was money made there, and they went to cable. So no, it wasn't as big as some of the Marvel movies, but it had to be commercially viable. I think any product to a certain degree has to be commercially viable, or it's got to be commercially viable for either streaming or, for in the old days, straight to video. It has to be commercially viable, or nobody will see the film. It'd just be you and your family looking at it over and over on a DVD.
Right.
So films are made to be seen. So whether it makes $200 million at the box office or $500 million at the box office, or whether it makes enough money to get your investment back on home video, I try to tell a story, and it's more artistic. I just try to tell a story.
It's great. It's a great time, though, because of streaming, there's a renaissance to the kind of stories you can tell, because it can find the audience for that kind of story. So it gets back to tell the story that you really have the greatest passion for.
Actually, one of the next question that I was going to ask you, it deals with that. With the recent closure of the ArcLight, how do you think cinema will change? Is this the end of theaters altogether, or the start of streaming giants?
Look, I think that cinema has always gone through all kinds of changes, from sociological reasons, technological reasons, and I believe there will always be a big screen experience. I think that I'm actually working on a project that involves actually bringing interactivity with a virtual reality component into a theatrical motion picture. It's actually a very, very big project that has some, big people involved with it, that I'm going to be dealing with the virtual reality side of. And it's, so there's a, necessity is the mother of invention. And all of these exhibitors that are out there, they have to reinvent themselves once again to create something that is giving a new generation a whole new experience. So I believe we're going to see more interactivity, more immersive experiences coming into the big screen experience, and that's going to be part of the evolution. So I believe it will change, but it's going to be something in many ways even bigger.
Next question is to Nick. How do you decide who will do music direction in your films? Darling Nest.
When you're first making movies, and the last thing when you're budgeting, if you have any budget, you think about is the music, So it's like, who can I get? Who will do this? And you try to get someone that needs a credit. And when you start getting where okay, the music is important here. It's always important because to me, the music is another piece of the storytelling. Listen, independent filmmakers, we're talking outside of studios here. So independent filmmakers are constantly, always trying to find ways to make your film better. And it's just reaching out, who knows somebody. And, you have to have a conversation with someone who's doing a score on I'm very big on music. And if I can include songs, that's another element. But speaking just of score, you have your conversation and where you feel, it needs to be, like a lot of times when you edited a film, I'll edit it and then pick a score from another great movie or maybe a couple combined to get a vibe of what should be going on. But then ultimately, then you, like we were saying very early, it's another artist that's going to come in and maybe do some things that you haven't thought of and put music where it should be and take music out where it shouldn't be. That's a whole thing. It's an editing thing too. There's sometimes I have some beautiful music, but I go, I need it quiet here. And as great as this piece is, I need to cut it. But that's an evolving a thing. But you're dealing with another artist who's contributing to your complete vision. So if you're starting out, I don't know if you're a student in the class, go to the music department and say, who plays keyboards, who plays strings, figure it out. With all of these elements, you have to figure it out as a young filmmaker. You start out with your friends, actors. That's what I did and made small movies. I had a play once that I go, if I expand this a little bit, it's going to cost me $25,000 to make the play. What if I raise $40,000? I'll just shoot it, and then, so that's just what dies. And then you go, then someone said, well, if you put one actor in there with a name, you can get a distributor. And then you're playing that game. Who's the name guy who I can get for a cheap movie? So many different elements to make a movie. I'm jumping outside of the question, but so for the music, it's the same thing. Wherever you are at in your filmmaking experience, you have to find a way to get it done. So there's always somebody that knows somebody wants a credit, some genius out there, some kid that's the nerd in your class that you never think of, and he's this musical genius that's going to come on your movie and blow your mind. So it's just a matter of actively pursuing it. If you're in it, if you're in your movie, I got to get this movie made. The actors will come, the filmmaker, the DP will come, the musician will come, the composer. It'll come if you're fighting and you're asking and you're pushing. I mean, that's been my experience and the other indie filmmakers that I know. You just learn by doing, as we all said earlier. You just got to do it. Go do it. Go out there and fight for it, and it'll come.
On Triumph, I had a genius composer who happened to be my brother. And he did an unbelievable job. And one of it, I knew we had a tight budget. And so often budget is what, drives some of these decisions. And I knew he could work miracles for this budget. And he did. He got a huge theatrical score for pennies, literally. And so, it was, you have to pull from the resources that are closest to you sometimes. And you also, as Nick is saying, sometimes it's serendipity. Someone just comes along and brings that perspective that is going to be the thing that takes your film to the next level.
And if you're going to study film at a film school, then you have the advantage being at a university, and the music departments at Cal State Northridge, our films are scored by students in a composition program just for media composition, just for scoring content. Yeah. And those scores sound like John Williams. These students had to audition to get into that music program. And but you're right. and if you're in a film school, you have your group with you. You know, USC had the USC Mafia, right? They called it at the film school there. And Lucas, you know, had all of his friends, Irvin Kershner and all of the Howard Kazanji, and they were all his classmates.
Yeah.
They were all his classmates that went with him. So if you do study at a university in film, then you have all of that. You have a whole studio of folks that are just as hungry, hopefully, as you are, and they're going to contribute that talent for free, you know, at that particular point. And then even when you leave school, trying to do those first independent films, if they're still hungry, they're going to do it free,
Yeah.
even out of film school, to get something out there and to get it on the festival route. So there's no excuse, as Brett had said earlier, there's no excuse for not following your passion and making a movie, because you can really make it. Tangerine, you can make it on your iPhone.
Tangerine is a perfect example. My God, amazing film made on a really low-end iPhone. You know? So, and no one cares. You're watching that movie and it's like this incredible human story of the streets in LA, and you're just like, wow. And then you find out later, oh, this is made on an iPhone for pennies. So it's an incredible time. It's an incredible time where there's all kinds of new technology, and yet there's all the basic tools to do this medium that you possibly need. Like in our generation, we had to go raise a lot of money to get something made. You don't really need to do that now. It's all about the power of your vision and the power of your story. That's the critical thing.
Favorite film of all time, Nick?
Well, Citizen Kane's up there. There's so many, but I have to say, because of my experience, The Godfather.
What about you and Nate?
For me, Godfather was one, but you know, another favorite was Forrest Gump. That film took me through every emotion. Very few films can do that, take you through every emotion. And it did that. And so my students always ask, what's your favorite film of all time? I said, well, I got a lot of them. But Godfather and Forrest Gump.
Good stuff. What about you, Brad?
Well, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool Kubrickian, so I got to say 2001: A Space Odyssey, because when I saw that at 7 years old, my parents were next to me. They were kind of arguing because they didn't understand a movie without dialogue. They were like, "What the hell is going on here?" And I turned to them and I said, "This is what I'm going to do," and they're like, "Yes, little Brady, that's fine." You know, and so that was the film. And then Persona by Ingmar Bergman at the other end of the spectrum. You know.
Yeah. It's a Wonderful Life. Yep, it should be up there too. I think for me, It's a Wonderful Life. I love that movie. And can I say Green Book? That's
there
one
you
of
go.
my
Me too.
I would never think to say that. It just hit me. I'm like, am I allowed to say that?
Absolutely.
Now this is Hollywood. The sequels is their Green Book 2.
I don't know. They were on the road for well over a year and a half, so there could be a Green Book 2 in there somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Good stuff. Guys, I want to thank you guys so much for participating. You know, it's very, very good stuff. And now we came to an end, and I want to thank you also, everybody who watched the seminars, and good luck with your career, and I will see you tomorrow on the next panel. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much for inviting us.
Guys, it was great meeting you on
Thanks
this.
everybody for listening.
Brett, congratulations on the film.
Yes, go out and see Triumph on the big screen.
I'm gonna go see it.
Yes.
There's a Cinemark in the Valley.
Yes. Okay, right. Bye-bye.
Frederico, get me those links, please.
Will do.
All right. Bye, guys.